take their marching orders from Donald Trump, and when do they break with him? Because at some point, maybe there needs to be a...
Let's go to the Clintons, Bill and Hilary. They've been asked to testify in front of the House Oversight Committee tomorrow and Wednesday, the president tomorrow, and the former Secretary of State on Wednesday. They're not going to show up. I'll be stunned if they show up. So what happens then?
Bill O'Reilly declares that basic courtesy is now off the table after reviewing Hillary Clinton, a congressional subpoena, and the chaos that follows. What unfolds is a blunt, eye-opening look at how status and authority crack under pressure, and what happens when responsibility comes calling and gets ignored. The idea that anyone stands above the rules starts to sound like a bad punchline. Tensions rise, patience disappears, and contradictions stack up fast. Nothing unfolds smoothly. How did a straightforward request for clarity turn into a full-blown political mess?
If you have confidence in your government, right this moment in history, please let me know and tell me why. All right, but apparently Hillary Clinton, I have confidence in it. And people are stupid because they don't watch MSNBC, which is the most rank propagandist network in the history of this country. NBC News, Comcast should be very, very proud.
If you're enjoying this, consider subscribing to the channel. You might be surprised by how much it helps. For years, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton have portrayed themselves as champions of trusted institutions, which makes their decisions to skip appearances before the House Oversight Committee especially damaging. That contrast between their public image and their actions raises serious questions and leaves a lasting impression.
Tonight, a basket of problems for Hillary Clinton. That is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. Not since President William Henry Harrison died of reported pneumonia in 1841, just 32 days into his term, as that lung infection captured the imagination of American voters. As you most likely know by now, Hillary Clinton faltered at a 9/11 memorial on Sunday here in New York City. Her campaign announcing afterwards she has pneumonia, something they knew.
The promise of equal responsibility begins to feel uneven instead of fair when former top government leaders treat a congressional subpoena like a polite suggestion instead of a binding order. That kind of response makes the standards seem flexible for some and strict for others, raising doubts about whether the rules truly apply to everyone the same way.
Is this grand jury, is trying to go back and relitigate this, is potentially putting Obama-era people in jail a good thing for the country?
Yeah. That these people tried to derail an election, tried to hurt a sitting president by bogus, phony, false conspiracies, because that's what
Isn't that called politics?
Using them.
That clash lies at the heart of Bill O'Reilly's criticism, framing the issue as a basic question of fairness in how rules are enforced, not as a fight between political camps. His argument is grounded in a clear, uncomplicated idea, one that makes its point without relying on elaborate ideological twists.
Is far overshadowed by the basket of deplorables comment.
To just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic.
No matter who receives it, a private citizen, a former president such as Bill Clinton, or a former Secretary of State like Hillary Clinton, a subpoena from the House Oversight Committee carries real legal authority. Choosing not to comply isn't a noble stand or a quiet form of protest. It's a procedural choice that brings specific legal consequences. Neither a long career in public service nor a well-known legacy changes that reality. Echoing Bill O'Reilly's view, Attorney Bob Driscoll highlights the gravity of the situation by pointing to recent real-world examples that leave little room for doubt. When Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro declined to cooperate with congressional subpoenas, they learned firsthand that refusal tends to lead to criminal charges rather than dramatic symbolism. Their cases establish a modern benchmark. When the Department of Justice concludes that the law has been intentionally violated, contempt of Congress is treated as a punishable offense. Drawing on these past outcomes, Bill O'Reilly underscores that the courts have already made clear what happens when subpoenas are ignored.
Throw another face on that montage, and that's Hillary Clinton. Because Hillary Clinton's campaign began this. Now, Hillary Clinton is going to say through her lawyer, look, I didn't know anything about it. It was all my surrogates, it was all my lesser people did it. I didn't know. I don't know this, that, and the other thing. But she's going to be investigated on that. And if people start to flip underneath Hillary Clinton, in those who worked on her campaign, and say, no. She was in a meeting on this date. She told us.
Bill Clinton's involvement in the Jeffrey Epstein inquiry is presented as a legitimate reason for examination, not as proof of wrongdoing. Investigators are expected to review his documented travel record, which includes 26 flights aboard Epstein's private plane. The fact that several of those trips overlapped with activities connected to the Clinton Foundation strengthens the case for clarification rather than silence. As Bill O'Reilly notes, the goal of testimony is not to declare guilt, but to answer questions that naturally arise from the record. Hillary Clinton's decision not to testify carries particular significance given her long-standing emphasis on transparency and democratic principles. Throughout her career, she has repeatedly stressed the importance of cooperating with oversight and honoring institutional authority. Critics argued that when those statements are paired with the refusal to engage with the House Oversight Committee, a gap emerges between stated values and actual behavior. Bill O'Reilly characterizes that gap as hypocrisy rather than a calculated move. Supporters of oversight have long maintained that legal review is a vital part of democracy and that cooperation with investigators is unavoidable. O'Reilly contends that this principle loses its meaning if it is applied only to political rivals and not to oneself.
Accurate. So I, your humble correspondent, kicked into reporter mode, and I found there two, one sworn affidavit by a victim that Bill Clinton was on the island, and a guy named Doug Band, Bill Clinton's top assistant post-presidency, who traveled with Putin on Epstein's plane. He's told Vanity Fair they went to the Virgin Islands where...
Refusing to cooperate with a subpoena is a blatant legal infraction rather than a contentious claim. Compared to many of the accusations they previously rejected as baseless, Bill O'Reilly's depiction of Clinton's disobedience appears to be more legally tangible. By describing the judicial process that follows contempt of Congress, Bob Driscoll reaffirms this argument. The Department of Justice may be engaged when the House Oversight Committee concludes that a subpoena has been disregarded. At that point, prosecutorial discretion takes over and political storylines start to recede. Bill O'Reilly claims that Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro were sentenced to prison because this process does not take into account previous titles or political affiliations. It is said that by not interacting with the House Oversight Committee, Bill and Hillary Clinton made a strategic error. Each could have defended their rights, explained timelines, and refuted charges within the bounds of the law if they had testified before Congress.
Talking Points believes that Secretary Clinton made a big mistake here, reminiscent of Mitt Romney saying that 47% of Americans would not vote for him because they want stuff. Every fair-minded person knows you cannot generalize about what is in people's hearts. And I do not include the far left under the banner of fair-minded.
He is attracting a certain type of voter. She gave a whole speech on describing them. They're called the alt-right.
On the other hand, quiet fosters suspicion and conjecture. For those who are certain of their innocence, being direct and honest, even if it causes discomfort, is typically the safest course of action, according to Bill O'Reilly. Avoidance is particularly harmful because Jeffrey Epstein's wrongdoings have a moral component. The study focuses on abuse and exploitation issues, which call for transparency and honesty from all parties involved. Since visible responsibility is the cornerstone of public trust, Bill O'Reilly underlines that even relationships that don't seem vital should be examined. It could appear that you don't care how serious the underlying charges are if you ignore inquiries concerning Jeffrey Epstein. The need for clarification is heightened when the Clinton Foundation is mentioned in relation to certain of Bill Clinton's trips. Public trust, which is crucial for philanthropic organizations, is rapidly undermined by unresolved concerns. Instead than viewing congressional testimony as a danger to institutional credibility, Bill O'Reilly presents it as a chance to maintain it. The story was determined by the Clintons' refusal to testify. Bill O'Reilly puts the problem in a larger context of alleged double standards. Many of the same lawmakers who are now advocating for moderation claimed that enforcement was required to uphold the rule of law when Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro were prosecuted. Bill O'Reilly contends that in order to maintain consistency, Hillary and Bill Clinton ought to be held to the same standards. Anything less turns justice from an impartial system into a politicized tool.
Clinton's in big trouble. Okay? Clapper, I don't know about. Okay, but Brennan, the allegation, which is solid, listen to me, solid, is that Brennan told the FBI that he did not want to use any of this Russian collusion stuff.
Because it represents the enforcement branch of federal law, the Department of Justice is significant in this matter. Bill O'Reilly urges the Department of Justice to act out of institutional duty rather than in response to political pressure. He contends that prosecutors' objective is to uphold the law as written, not to consider reputational or electoral repercussions. If those in positions of power do nothing in circumstances of blatant violation, they may avoid accountability. When enforcement is based on who is being investigated rather than what the law requires, equality before the law loses credibility. In the end, the discussion touches on the state of democratic institutions as well as the Clintons. Bill O'Reilly cautions that the public becomes cynical and disillusioned as a result of selective enforcement. People's faith in the government quickly declines when they think that the weak are above the law. Clear examples of accountability are necessary to rebuild that confidence, especially when it comes to well-known individuals like Hillary and Bill Clinton.
The Oversight Committee, James Comer, says, we want your depositions closed or private about Epstein. Why? Because Bill Clinton took 26 trips aboard Epstein's plane, a lot of them in conjunction with the Clinton Foundation, which Hillary Clinton is a chief officer of. That's why.
Rather, he presents it as a procedure and an explanatory need. Testimony in front of the House Oversight Committee would confirm or deny worries. Avoidance guarantees that doubts remain and skepticism turns into mistrust to trust. The impact of Bill and Hillary Clinton on contemporary political culture is inextricably linked to their legacy. Public expectations on morality, lawfulness, and openness are shaped by this impact. According to Bill O'Reilly, it is now essential to preserve the exact values that they originally promoted in order to respect that tradition. Disobedience damages their reputation as well as the standards they promoted. The decision remains difficult in light of the current circumstances. Bill and Hillary Clinton have two options. Either they cooperate with the House Oversight Committee and respect the process, or they continue to disobey a legitimate mandate and run the prospect of escalation through the Department of Justice. That decision, according to Bill O'Reilly, was a watershed rather than a small procedural disagreement. Consistency, not indignation, is the foundation of the larger message being sent to the American people.
A woman apparently believing that all who support Donald Trump are racist and inferior human beings. That opinion echoed on the op-ed page of the New York Times today by another far-left loon. What Mrs. Clinton's comments really do, what they really do, is mobilize those who were thinking about voting for Donald Trump. Not his hardcore supporters, those who are not quite sure. I mean, come on. Branding people racist is despicable. Everybody knows that, unless there's undeniable.
The argument ultimately comes back to a single point that has been repeated so often, it risks losing persuasive power. No one can legitimately claim to be above the law without eroding the very system that granted them authority. Not even Bill and Hillary Clinton. According to Bill O'Reilly, public trust in that system can only be restored through consistent enforcement and transparent procedures. O'Reilly broadens the discussion to show how institutional silence compounds the problem, extending beyond the immediate legal consequences. He highlights the muted response from major media outlets that previously thrived on aggressive oversight coverage when investigations targeted others. He argues that this lack of consistent scrutiny creates a knowledge imbalance, shielding the Clintons from the level of examination normally applied elsewhere. This imbalance shapes more than public perception. It actively determines which stories gain traction and which fade from attention. O'Reilly also notes the timing of the refusal occurring at a moment when confidence in institutions is already fragile. Years of apparent inconsistency have weakened trust in government, the media, and law enforcement. In this context, the Clintons' decision to ignore the House Oversight Committee appears less like a calculated legal move and more like a continuation of long-standing skepticism toward authority. The general public, he observes, lacks the same awareness of optics that seasoned political actors navigate with ease.
To the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice prosecuted both of them and gained convictions. And both cases went up on appeal, and both convictions were upheld.
Okay, so that was Merrick Garland and Joe Biden, the president. And they put them in the jail, and Navarro and Pannon both said, okay, I'm willing to do the time. Now, that's not going to happen with Bill and Hillary Clinton, is it?
I wouldn't be so sure. I think it could happen.
Do you think the sitting president, a former president of the United States, is going to get sentenced to prison?
Another factor to consider is precedent beyond U.S. borders. Bill O'Reilly argues that the country's credibility on the world stage depends heavily on its willingness to hold its own leaders accountable. When figures like Bill and Hillary Clinton are shielded from scrutiny, both allies and critics can accuse them of hypocrisy, weakening their moral authority. The real impact of U.S. commitments to transparency and the rule of law abroad is measured by how consistently those principles are applied at home. O'Reilly also examines how tolerated defiance shapes culture. When high-ranking officials face no immediate consequences for breaking the law, it sends a signal down the chain of authority. Lower-level officials, business leaders, and even private citizens may conclude that compliance is optional if one wields enough influence. The idea that norms serve as shared boundaries rather than flexible guidelines is gradually eroded. He highlights the generational effects as well. Young Americans already skeptical of politics are likely to notice whether accountability is actually enforced. O'Reilly notes that when prominent figures like Hillary Clinton avoid criticism while promoting it publicly, the disconnect discourages civic participation. Unequal enforcement, he contends, stifles the very foundation of democracy.